For 5 years, I sent money home every single month without missing once. Not because anyone asked me nicely, because I believed that's what good daughters do. Let me tell you exactly how that belief almost destroyed me and what I did when I finally stopped believing it. My name is Sophie. I'm 29 years old. I work as a staff accountant at a mid-sized logistics firm in Columbus, Ohio. I'm the kind of person who color codes her budget spreadsheets, keeps a 6-month emergency fund, and never not once overdrafts her checking account. I say this not to brag. I say this because what happened to me wasn't about being irresponsible with money. It was about trusting the wrong people with mine. I have one sibling, my brother, Derek. He's 24, 5 years younger than me, which means when I graduated college and landed my first real job at 22, he was 17 and just starting his senior year of high school. My father runs a small landscaping business. My mother does part-time bookkeeping. They sat me down 2 weeks after I got my first paycheck. My father said, and I remember this clearly because I wrote it in my journal that night, he said, "Sophie, you've always been the strong one. Derek is going to need support getting through college. We're counting on you." I felt proud. I actually felt proud hearing that. The strong one. I held on to those words like they were a compliment. So, I set up an automatic transfer. $400 a month, straight to my parents' joint account, earmarked, they told me, for Derek's tuition. Books, housing, all of it. I didn't ask for receipts. I didn't ask for updates. I trusted them the way you trust family, which is to say, completely and without question. And for a while, everything seemed fine. My mother would call on Sundays and mention that Derek was doing well, that he'd made friends, that his professors liked him. My father would occasionally say something like, "We really appreciate what you're doing, sweetheart." That was enough for me. I didn't need a parade. I just needed to know it was working. I kept getting promoted at work. I was good at my job, careful, thorough, never missed a deadline. By 26, I had moved into a nicer apartment, bought a used car that actually started every morning, started contributing more to my 401k. I felt like I was building something. And every month, $400 left my account like clockwork, and I barely thought about it anymore. It had become as automatic as breathing. The first sign that something was wrong came 18 months ago, and I almost missed it entirely. I was home for Thanksgiving. My brother was supposed to be there junior year, supposedly, but he showed up looking different. Not sick, exactly, but hollowed out, like something behind his eyes had gone quiet. He barely touched his food. He spent most of dinner on his phone. When I asked him how school was going, he looked at my mother for just a half-second before he answered. That half-second. I noticed it, filed it away, told myself I was being paranoid. After dinner, my mother asked me to help her in the kitchen, and while we were washing dishes, she said, very casually, "Derek's been going through a hard time. He might take next semester off. Just to reset." I said okay. I said I hoped he was all right. She changed the subject to my aunt's new house, and I let her. I flew back to Columbus on Sunday, and on Monday morning $400 left my account as usual. It wasn't until March, 4 months later, that I found out the truth, and I didn't even find it out from my family. I found it out from Derek's former roommate, a guy named Caleb who I'd met once at a graduation party years ago, and who, by pure coincidence, followed me on Instagram. He saw a photo I posted of my parents' house at Christmas and sent me a DM. He said he didn't know if I knew, but Derek had dropped out. Not next semester. 8 months ago. Last spring. I read that message 3 times standing in my kitchen at 7 in the morning, still in my pajamas. 8 months ago, I had sent $3,200 to my parents in the time between Derek dropping out and that moment. $3,200 that was no longer going toward tuition or books or housing because there was no tuition, no books, no housing. Derek wasn't in school. He was living at home. And nobody had told me. I didn't call right away. That's important to understand about me. I don't react when I'm emotional. I learned that from being an accountant. You don't make decisions with bad data, and you don't make decisions while you're shaking. So I waited 2 days. I pulled up my bank statements, and I calculated the full amount I had sent since Derek's freshman year. Across 4.5 years, I had transferred $21,600 to my parents. $21,600. I sat with that number for a long time. Then I called my mother on a Wednesday evening, and I asked her, very calmly, how Derek's second semester of junior year was going. There was a pause that lasted just long enough to tell me everything. Then she said, "Sophie, we've been meaning to talk to you about that." They had known since April. My mother, my father, both of them. Derek had called home in tears in April, saying he couldn't handle it anymore. The coursework, the pressure, the distance from home. And they had driven up to his campus, helped him pack his things, brought him home, and said nothing to me. For 8 months they had said nothing to me, while my $400 kept arriving every month like a little envelope of proof that I had no idea what was actually happening in my own family. My mother said, "We didn't want to worry you. You were doing so well." She said it like that was a kindness, like protecting me from the truth was something they had done for my benefit. I asked where the money had been going. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said they'd used it to cover some of the business expenses. My father's landscaping equipment needed repairs. They'd fallen a little behind. They figured since Derek was home and not in school, they needed it more than ever to keep things stable. I said, "So you took my money without telling me?" She said, "Sophie, it's family money. We needed it." I said goodnight, and I hung up. Before I tell you what happened next, I need to ask you something. Have you ever been in a situation where someone you love completely redefined something right in front of you, and what they redefined was you? Because that's what that phone call was. It wasn't just about money. It was about the fact that in my family's accounting of things, my income was a shared resource, and my knowledge of how it was used was optional. I was the strong one, which meant I was the one who could handle being lied to. Which meant I was the one who could handle anything, because that was the role. And the role came before the person. I didn't confront them that week. I did something more deliberate than that. I canceled the automatic transfer. No phone call. No email. No explanation. I simply logged into my bank account, found the recurring transfer, and deleted it. 47 seconds. I timed it. Then I waited to see how long it would take them to notice. It took 11 days. My father called on a Tuesday afternoon. I let it go to voicemail. He said, "Hey sweetheart, just checking in. I think there might have been an issue with the transfer this month. Give me a call when you get a chance." Friendly, casual. The voice of a man who had no idea the ground had shifted under him. I didn't call back. 3 days later my mother called. Same story. Transfer might have gotten delayed. "Everything okay? Call us back. Love you." I didn't call back. I want to be honest with you about what those days felt like, because I think it matters. I wasn't angry exactly. Anger is loud and hot, and I wasn't either of those things. What I felt was something colder and more clarifying, like the moment after you've been sick for a long time and you finally stop pretending you feel fine. I had been pretending for years. Pretending that being called the strong one was the same as being valued. Pretending that sacrifice without acknowledgement was love. Pretending that a family that counted on you, and a family that saw you were the same thing. They are not the same thing. They are not even close. 2 weeks after I canceled the transfer, my parents called a family meeting. They asked me to come home for a weekend. I went, because I wanted to look them in the eye when I said what I was going to say. I drove down on a Saturday morning. Derek was there, sitting on the couch in sweatpants, which told me he was still living at home with no apparent plan. My father was at the kitchen table, with a yellow legal pad in front of him, which told me he had prepared talking points, which made something cold settle in my chest. My mother was standing at the counter making coffee she didn't need to make. My father started. He said there had obviously been some miscommunication. He said they should have told me about Derek sooner, and they were sorry about that. He said the business had been struggling and the money I contributed had been genuinely necessary to keep things going. Then he said, "And I need you to hear this exactly as I heard it," he said. "Sophie, you're the one with the stable job and no dependents. You're in the best position to help. Derek is still figuring things out. He needs more runway than you did." More runway. My brother needed more runway. I looked at Derek. He was looking at the floor. I looked at my father. I said, "How much of the $21,600 went to Derek's actual education?" Silence. I said, "I calculated it. I have every transfer statement going back 4.5 years. How much of it was tuition?" My mother set down her coffee cup. My father said, "We don't need to put numbers on everything. This is family." I said, "How much?" He said it was probably around 60% in the early years, and then less toward the end. Which, if you run the math, the way I ran it later that afternoon in my car, means somewhere between $6,000 and $8,000 out of $21,000 went to what I was actually told it was for. The rest went to the business, to equipment repairs, to payroll gaps, to whatever else they needed, and decided my money was available to cover. I sat there for a moment, and then I said the thing I had been rehearsing for 2 weeks. I said, "I'm not going to send money anymore. Not to the business, not for Derek, not for anything. I want to be clear that this isn't a punishment, it's just accurate. I've been funding something I didn't agree to fund, and now I'm stopping." My father said, "Sophie, the business can't absorb that right now." I said, "I know." He said, "We could lose the 2 accounts we just picked up if we can't cover the equipment lease." I said, "I know." My mother said, "Sophie, please. We're your family. This is what family does." And I said, "I've been doing it for 5 years. Now it's your turn to figure it out." I got up. I hugged my mother, because I'm not made of stone. And the hug she gave me back was tight in a way that felt like she knew, somewhere under all the justifications, that she had done something that couldn't be undone. I shook my father's hand, which I had never done before in my life, and the formality of it seemed to knock something loose in him because he looked startled. I nodded at Derek, who finally looked up from the floor and said, "Sophie, I'm sorry," and I believed him. I actually believed him. He was 24, and had been as shaped by this family as I had, just in a different direction. I drove home. For 3 weeks, nothing happened. No calls, no texts. I went to work. I cooked dinner. I went to the gym. I transferred $400 into my own savings account, which felt strange, and then felt right. Then my father's business partner, a man named Gerald, who I had met maybe 4 times at company barbecues, sent me a LinkedIn message. He said he'd heard I had stepped back from supporting the family business and wanted to know if there was any chance I'd reconsider because they were in a tough spot. My father had apparently told Gerald that I had been an informal financial backer. Gerald thought I was an investor. Gerald thought this was a business relationship. I took a screenshot of that message, and I stared at it for a very long time. I wrote back to Gerald and told him, politely, that I had not been a financial backer. That I had been a daughter who had been sending money home under the impression it was for my brother's education, and that I had recently learned otherwise, and that I would not be continuing. I wished him well with the business. I forwarded the screenshot to my parents with no message. My mother called 40 minutes later. I answered. She was not calm this time. She was not making coffee she didn't need to make or choosing her words carefully. She said, "What did you say to Gerald? Do you have any idea what you've done? He's asking questions now. He wants to see the books." "Sophie, why would you do that?" I said, "I told him the truth." She said, "That's our business. That's our livelihood. You can't just..." I said, "Mom, I sent you $21,000 over 5 years. You told me it was for Derek's education. He dropped out 8 months before you told me. You used my money for the business without asking me." Gerald thought I was an investor. I simply clarified that I wasn't. She was quiet. I said, "I'm not trying to hurt the business. I'm not trying to hurt you. But I'm also not going to protect a version of events that isn't true." She said, very quietly, "Your father is going to lose the equipment lease." I said, "I know. I'm sorry that's happening. I genuinely am." She said, "How can you be sorry and still do nothing?" I said, "The same way you were sorry, and still said nothing for 8 months." She didn't have an answer to that. I said I loved her. I said I meant it. I said I hoped things worked out with the business. I said I would talk to her again when some time had passed and things were calmer. Then I said goodbye, and I ended the call. I sat in my apartment for a long time after that. I want to be careful here, because I know what this story sounds like from the outside, and I know some of you are thinking, good for her, finally, get out, scorched earth. And some of you are thinking, that's still her family, she could have handled it differently, she went too far. Both of those reactions make sense to me. This wasn't triumphant. It didn't feel like winning. It felt like standing in a room after the furniture has been moved, and trying to remember where everything used to be. But here is what I know, and what I want you to hear if you need to hear it today. There is a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from being reliable in a family that mistakes your reliability for inexhaustibility. When you always show up, people stop noticing that you showed up. They start noticing only when you don't. 5 years of $400 a month had made me invisible. It was the absence of it that made me real to them again. And that's a painful thing to understand about people you love. That your presence is only felt through your usefulness. I didn't cut my family off. I want to be clear about that. My mother and I have spoken several times since that phone call. It's careful and a little formal in a way it never used to be, and I don't know yet if that ever goes away. My father has not called me directly. Derek texted me in January to say he'd enrolled in a community college program for HVAC certification and that he was paying for it himself with money from a part-time job, and I told him I was proud of him, and I meant that completely. The business survived. My father renegotiated the equipment lease, brought Gerald in as an actual partial partner to cover the gap, and from what my mother tells me, things are more stable now, though smaller than before. I don't know exactly what Gerald saw when he looked at the books. I didn't ask and wasn't told. That part isn't mine to carry. What is mine to carry? What I'm still learning to carry, honestly, is the knowledge that I participated in this for a long time. The commenter who once wrote that doormats always blame someone else for not helping them stand up. I thought about that. I thought about it more than I wanted to, because it's not entirely wrong. I had information, at points, that something was off. The pause before Derek answered at Thanksgiving. The too casual way my mother mentioned he might take a semester off. I had noticed things, and chosen not to push, because pushing felt disloyal and silence felt like love, and I had confused those two things for years. That's the part that took me longest to make peace with. Not what they did. What I allowed, out of a need to be needed, out of a fear that if I asked hard questions the answers would cost me something I wasn't ready to lose. Here's what those $21,000 bought me, in the end, even if it wasn't what I meant to buy. The absolute certainty that I can rebuild. I know what I'm worth now, not in the way my parents meant when they called me the strong one, which was another way of saying convenient, dependable, available. I mean worth, in the accounting sense. Assets, liabilities, the real balance sheet of what I give and what I receive in return. Every month now, $400 goes into a fund I've named, privately, in my spreadsheet, with a label I look at every time I log in. I labeled it, for Sophie. It's the first financial decision I've made in 5 years that was entirely mine. If you're watching this and you recognize yourself in any part of what I just told you, the automatic transfers, the pride at being called the strong one, and the small moments you noticed and filed away and did nothing with, I want you to know that noticing is enough to start with. You don't have to have the kitchen table conversation today. You don't have to make the decision today. You just have to let yourself see it clearly. And if you're ready to see it clearly, start there. The rest follows. If this story hit close to home, drop a comment below and tell me. What's the one thing someone in your family has said that reframed everything for you? The sentence you keep coming back to. I read every single one. And if you know someone who needs to hear this today, please share it with them. Sometimes the most important thing we can do for someone is simply let them know they're not the only one. There's a cause and effect logic to everything that happened in this story, and I think it's worth naming it plainly before we part ways. For 5 years, I acted as though being depended on was the same as being loved. Every month I reinforced that belief with $400, and every month my family reinforced it back by calling me reliable, calling me strong, calling me the one who had it together. What none of us said out loud, what I didn't let myself think too clearly, was that a person can be completely essential to a system and completely invisible within it at the same time. That's not love. That's infrastructure. The consequences my family faced weren't something I engineered. I didn't call Gerald to cause damage. I told him the truth because the truth was the only thing I had left that was entirely mine. What followed the questions about the books, the renegotiated lease, the uncomfortable conversations, those were the natural results of choices my parents had been making for years. They had built something on a foundation that included my silence and my money, and when I withdrew both, the structure had to reckon with what it was actually made of. That's not cruelty. That's just cause and effect catching up. Here's what I've come to understand about integrity. It's not a grand gesture. It's not the moment you finally say the hard thing at the kitchen table, though that matters too. It's the accumulation of smaller choices, the choice to notice what you've been filing away, the choice to ask the question you've been afraid to ask, the choice to stop funding a version of events that isn't true. Integrity isn't loud. It often looks, from the outside, like nothing at all. Like a canceled bank transfer. Like 11 days of not calling back. Intelligence, real intelligence, isn't just about processing information quickly. It's about being honest with yourself about what the information means. I had data points for months, the pause at Thanksgiving, the too casual mention of a semester off, and I chose not to analyze them, because the analysis would have cost me something. That kind of willful blindness is its own choice, and it has its own consequences. The moment I let myself see clearly was the moment things started to change. Not because I became harder, but because I became more honest. And resilience. I used to think resilience meant absorbing more, enduring more, being the one who could handle it. What I know now is that real resilience is the capacity to rebuild after you've stopped absorbing what was never yours to carry. It's quieter than toughness. It looks like opening a spreadsheet and labeling a savings account with your own name. It looks like driving home after a hard conversation and feeling, underneath everything, strangely okay. Sophie didn't walk away from her family. She walked toward herself. And those are not the same direction, until suddenly, one day, they are.